This lecture is entitled Presidency, Advisors, Styles, Executive Privilege, and Pardon. Now, there are many presidential advisors. We begin with the Executive Office of the President. This is an enormous organization containing within itself many smaller organizations. Now, out of these smaller organizations, the one that stands out is called the White House Office. The White House Office is so powerful and, in fact, so special that it can almost be considered its own organization, almost separate from the rest of the Executive Office of the President, even though in the technical sense, the White House Office is a part of the Executive Office of the President. The White House Office has in itself many positions, and it is coordinated by the White House Chief of Staff, whose role it is to bring all the various other positions together. Now, what is the purpose of the White House Office? It is simply this. It is to give political advice to the President and also to engage in political spin. Now, political spin does not have to be a negative term. We simply have to understand that just as in business, even if you have a good product, you have to promote it still. So is in politics. Even if you're a good politician with good programs, you must promote those programs, or otherwise they will end up as nothing more than programs. You want to turn them into legislation. So how does the White House Office do that? It promotes President's agenda to all of the following: Congress, the media, and public opinion. Why? Because Congress has to be involved in the lawmaking process. And of course, if you promote your program to the media and to the public, then media and the public can generate pressure on members of Congress to pass laws that the President wants Congress to pass. Inside the Executive Office of the President, there are also other agencies whose role it is to give not so much political advice, but rather technical policy advice. Have you ever thought of how President can know different things about technology, about education, about energy, etc.? How can one person who may have been educated as a lawyer or as a military officer, how can a person like this know all the different things? And of course, I mean, he doesn't. Oh, he knows many of them, but superficially. What happens in actuality is he has to have a lot of advisors, and then he should exercise good judgment in taking the advice of his advisors. So Executive Office of the President has many offices that contain expertise. For example, the Office of Economic Advisors advises the President on what else but economy, right? And so there's an Office for Technology, etc., so that technical policy advice could be had by the President. Next is Cabinet. So Cabinet can best be understood as that important group of advisors who are responsible for actually telling the President how policy will be carried out in the real world. So if the White House Office engages in political advice and political spin, and the Executive Office of the President focuses on technical policy advice, then Cabinet focuses on how can then that particular course of action that the President has chosen can be carried out. The Cabinet consists automatically of all heads of executive departments. There are currently 15 executive departments in the United States government, and the heads of all departments are members of the Cabinet. So, for example, the Department of Justice is headed by Attorney General. She is a member of the Cabinet. The Department of Defense is headed by Secretary of Defense. He is a member of the Cabinet, etc., etc. In addition to heads of various departments, President can include in his Cabinet other important federal government officials at his discretion. And by tradition, and that's a relatively recent tradition, President includes members of some important independent agencies like the CIA. Head of the CIA, director of the CIA is a member of the Cabinet. Heads of the Environmental Protection Agency have also been, in recent decades, members of the President's Cabinet. In addition, there are other advisors. For example, the National Security Advisor is a standalone position. This office does not have any subordinates, does not have any departments to lead. This is simply a foreign policy expert who advises President. And finally, we can talk about kitchen cabinet. That's an informal group of advisors. Potentially, this can include almost anyone. The term kitchen cabinet originated in the first half of the 19th century during presidency of Andrew Jackson as a derisive term, as Andrew Jackson's opponents tried to say, well, this guy is just huddling with members of his cabinet in the kitchen, right? So hence kitchen cabinet, informal advisors. If president wants to consult an astrologer to determine his schedule, he can. I mean, or his third grade teacher. Technically, there's nothing that prevents that. So formal advice can be had from virtually anyone. Finally, we talk about work styles, and this is a broad topic in and of itself. President's styles of governance are important because they shape presidency and they shape president's policies. How are styles determined? They're determined by primary policy interests, desire to delegate versus the desire to get personally involved, willingness to accept actual advice, independent advice, and criticism sometimes, versus just settling for mere confirmation of his own opinions. So president can choose different courses of action. Now, let's take each one of these in turn. Let's look at policy interests. How do they determine presidential styles? Well, first and foremost, broadly speaking, we can talk about those presidents who are primarily interested in domestic policy and those that are primarily interested in foreign policy. There are temptations either way. Now, presidents can be tempted to be very active and prioritize foreign policy because in this area, presidential power is even greater than it is in domestic policy. And this is known as the two presidencies theory. The two presidencies theory. Once again, it refers to the idea that in foreign policy, president's power is even greater than in domestic policy. And the reason why this happens is because president has several formal roles which amplify his foreign policy powers. He is head of state, he is commander-in-chief, and he is chief diplomat. However, despite very real temptations to prioritize foreign policy, all presidents have some experience and some extensive knowledge in domestic policy because they have been born and raised in the United States and they have had a lot of experience in the United States. So everyone has been involved in education, in one way or another. For example, they may have been the subject of education policies. They have been educated by someone else. They have had some experience with law enforcement because they have observed police at work. So there is some experience in domestic policy, and that alone is a serious temptation to focus on domestic policy, whereas not all presidents have had any significant experience in foreign policy. Many came into office by being foreign policy amateurs. Now, presidents who have shown stronger preference for foreign policy included Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., and George Bush Jr. But even these foreign policy-oriented presidents cannot ignore domestic policy and must pay a lot of attention to it, even when they do not want to. Why? Because domestic policy involves domestic politics, right? Policy and politics cannot be separated completely, and it is domestic politics that usually determines the outcome of presidential and congressional elections. Some presidents have shown much stronger interest in domestic policy than in foreign policy. This includes President Bill Clinton, And President Barack Obama, during the first 6 years of his presidency, the last 2 years of his presidency, Barack Obama did heavily engage in foreign policy, partly because he had reached, I think, a dead end in domestic policy as Republican Congress basically refused to pass any of his agenda, while he still tried to do something domestically, for example, his executive orders on gun control in 2016, but clearly the last year or two of his presidency, he shifted more toward foreign policy, but Bill Clinton certainly tried to be domestic policy president as much as possible. Even domestic policy-oriented presidents have temptations the other way. So even Bill Clinton, who was governor of Arkansas, who was primarily interested in domestic policy, who came in knowing a lot more about domestic policy than foreign policy, still did a lot in the foreign policy area. For example, he was extremely interventionist, more interventionist than any president since Woodrow Wilson, and that's because the nature of the United States is such that it is a world power. It is a big country with lots of intercontinental interests. So Clinton would engage in everything from military interventions in Haiti, Bosnia, and Kosovo to diplomatic interventions, for example, with the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 that brought peace to Northern Ireland after approximately 3 decades of intermittent violent struggle there. You can also differentiate presidential styles by differentiating presidents who have been delegators and those who have been policy wonks. Now, a delegator is someone who basically says, I have some broad ideas for what I want to accomplish, but I don't necessarily know exactly how I want to accomplish it. So here's my broad plan, and you members of Congress, you flesh it out as much as you can. Policy wonks, in contrast, want to get involved personally as much as they want in the so-called nitty-gritty of policymaking. So delegators who, among American presidents, who stand out would be Warren Harding, Ronald Reagan, George Bush Jr., and yes, Barack Obama. Barack Obama's signature achievement, known as Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or more colloquially as Obamacare, basically resulted from Barack Obama punting his idea to Congress and basically saying, I want everyone insured, and you, Congress, figure out how to do it. So Warren Harding, Ronald Reagan, George Bush Jr., and Barack Obama can best be described as delegators. In contrast, we had a lot of presidents who have been policy wonks, who knew a lot about policy details and personally wanted to manage those details. Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Bush Sr. Probably should be considered among policy wonks. Now, sometimes the line between involvement in the details of policy-making process and micromanagement is blurred. That is to say, if you are a policy wonk as president, you better watch out. You better not become a micromanager, because micromanagement is generally bad. No matter how much you know as president, sometimes the small details are best left to people who are supposed to carry them out. And so if you get too involved, this results in rigidity and sometimes obsessive control. So what I'm trying to say is there is not one right style. It's incorrect to say that it's great to be a delegator but not a wonk, or it's great to be a wonk but not a delegator. It all depends really on the circumstances, and it all depends on whether you can balance your preference of delegator versus wonk with the needs, the circumstances of the time. Seeking advice versus seeking affirmation. Now, some presidents have sought real advice from their advisors. Others have only wanted their own opinions echoed and confirmed. Those who have sought real advice included George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, and Jimmy Carter. Those who basically wanted to have their egos confirmed: Teddy Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson. And once again, there's not necessarily one best way. It does seem like seeking real advice is better. But even when you seek real advice, you still have to be careful to maintain your own principles and your vision and your backbone and your direction. Because if you don't, you become kind of like Jimmy Carter, whose foreign policy has often been characterized by experts as being schizophrenic because he followed contrary advice, one from his state Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and another from his national security advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. Taking advice is great as long as you exercise some kind of considered direct judgment that pursues one direction. But if you're just seeking confirmation, like Lyndon Johnson, you end up listening to yourself and pursuing a course of action that leads into a kind of policy and political dead end, as happened with Lyndon Johnson when he tried to do too much. He tried to win the war in Vietnam by, among other things, personally directing military operations, and also by, at the same time, pursuing a very ambitious program at home called the Great Society. And had he been more open-minded, he would have learned from others that he was trying to have too much too fast. End poverty, defeat communism in Southeast Asia, and do it all in a matter of years, too much too fast. Sources of advice to President, well, we have just discussed that the White House office and the Executive Office of the President and Kitchen Cabinet. Executive privilege is something that most presidents have asserted, starting from George Washington to the present. And the executive privilege is when you basically say, I'm not going to tell Congress and the public what I have discussed with members of the executive branch. The idea behind executive privilege is that in order to conduct government business, sometimes president has to be candid with his subordinates and his advisors, and he cannot be candid if he knows that whatever he says will be released to Congress and the public. And of course, his advisors and subordinates cannot also be fully candid if they know that whatever they say will become a matter of public record. So executive privilege is meant to protect confidentiality on the grounds that doing so actually promotes effective work of the executive branch. You can tell, I trust, the problem that this can cause. What if President says, you know what, I'm not going to release this information to Congress and the public, but he claims executive privilege, but in actuality, he's just trying to hide some embarrassing details and does not want to subject himself and his advisors to proper public scrutiny. So there's always a tension between these two. Generally, the Supreme Court recognized that when it's a matter of national security, Congress and public do not necessarily have the right to know. But if president is just trying to hide embarrassing details, then executive privilege is not operative. And then there are more ambiguous cases in between. So there's not a bright line of when executive privilege operates and when it doesn't. Presidential pardon. President can pardon anyone for a federal offense, not for a state or local offense. That's up to governors. And in some states, like in Nevada, for boards of pardon, and governor would be just one member of that board. But when you talk about federal crimes, it's up to president, and he can pardon anyone at any stage of the criminal process, when it begins, when it's in progress, and when it's already ended. And president can also issue different degrees of pardon. The president can pardon the crime altogether and absolve person of the entire criminal liability, or president can issue a partial pardon, for example, by commuting a criminal sentence from death to life in prison, or from life in prison to 20 years in prison. So the president can do that. It's a significant power. Virtually every president has exercised it. A lot of the pardons come near the end of president's term in office, because presidents do not want to arouse more controversy than they have to by issuing pardons. The result is that a slew of pardons typically comes out, within weeks or sometimes days before president leaves office. And that's it for this particular video.